Ancient geometry that built cathedrals was nearly erased forever. This is the story of the lost libraries that preserved knowledge modern science only just rediscovered. A tale of intellectual treasure hunts spanning continents and eras. You will see history not as a static record, but as a dynamic puzzle with missing pieces we are still finding today. How did a prayer book hide the secrets of a Greek genius? What forgotten medical text, hidden for 800 years, revolutionized modern surgery? We will explore the hidden vaults, the dedicated scribes, and the manuscripts that vanished from memory, only to resurface and change everything. By the end of this journey, you will understand how ancient wisdom, once thought extinct, is now fueling modern innovation. What forgotten chapter of history do you think is waiting to be found? Flames consumed the Library of Alexandria, but its true tragedy was not the fire itself. It was the silencing of 1,000 conversations, the severing of a chain of thought that had stretched for centuries. This single event stands as a powerful symbol for a far more widespread phenomenon, the shocking fragility of human understanding. Yet the story of lost knowledge is rarely so simple as a blaze turning pages to ash. More often, knowledge simply went to sleep. It became inaccessible, falling out of the conversation for generations, waiting in silence for a key to turn. Historians like James Hannam argue that the so-called Dark Ages were not an intellectual vacuum. They were a period of quiet preservation, where advanced ideas survived in isolated pockets, like embers banked in a hearth, safe but unseen by the wider world. So how does knowledge actually become lost? It happens in several ways. The first is the one we all envision: physical destruction. A library burns, a city is sacked. But the second is more subtle: a linguistic disappearance. A text survives, but it is written in a language or a script that later generations can no longer decipher. The knowledge is physically present, but its meaning is locked away, a book with no key. The third way is perhaps the most common and the most tantalizing: simple neglect. A manuscript is stored away in a chest, placed on a high shelf in a remote monastery, or inherited by someone who does not understand its value. It is not destroyed, but it is forgotten, separated from the main currents of intellectual life. This crucial distinction between total destruction and temporary obscurity is the heart of our story. The vast majority of what we call lost was not annihilated. It was merely waiting. How many of our modern breakthroughs are actually ancient insights, finally waking from a long slumber? To find the first answer, we must travel to a library that defied oblivion from its very foundation. The intellectual flame of Alexandria did not simply go out, it was carried east. By the 9th century, a new beacon of knowledge was burning brightly in Baghdad, a city that had become the scientific capital of the world. This was the House of Wisdom, known in Arabic as Beit al-Hikmah, but to call it merely a library is to misunderstand its purpose entirely. It was a powerhouse of thought, a state-funded research institute where the goal was not just to collect knowledge, but to actively translate, debate, and expand it. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, scholars of various faiths and backgrounds, including Muslims, Christians, and Jews, were recruited and paid to gather under one roof. Their monumental task was to seek out the great works of the Greeks, the Persians, and the Indians, and to render them into Arabic, the lingua franca of the scholarly world. This was not a passive act of preservation. It was a deliberate, systematic project to build a new encyclopedia of human understanding. And it was here that a mathematician named Al-Khwarizmi worked, a man whose name, filtered through Latin translations, would eventually give us the word algorithm. He synthesized Indian numerical systems and Greek mathematical thought to forge a new field of study, which he detailed in his book Hisab al-Jabr. That title, al-Jabr, is the root of our word algebra. The scholars at the House of Wisdom did not just copy old texts, they built upon them, creating original commentaries and pioneering new sciences in optics, astronomy, and medicine. The works of Ptolemy, Euclid, and Aristotle, which were crumbling into dust in neglected libraries elsewhere, were here translated, meticulously copied, and debated in vibrant study circles. The House of Wisdom became the crucial bridge, a single institution that actively kept the flame of classical knowledge alive for centuries. Its legacy demonstrates that knowledge survives when it is valued, funded, and put into conversation. But this great center of learning was not destined to last forever. Its eventual fate was one of violent dispersal, a catastrophe that would ironically scatter its preserved treasures far and wide, sending them on a new journey toward an unexpected continent. While the House of Wisdom centralized knowledge, a more decentralized, resilient network was quietly operating along the Silk Road. Far from the grand libraries of Baghdad, the survival of ancient texts depended on a chain of remote outposts. In the oasis towns and mountain monasteries that dotted the trade routes, an unsung army of scribes worked tirelessly. These were the Scriptoria, dedicated writing rooms where monks and sometimes merchants meticulously copied texts onto durable vellum and paper. Their work was not glamorous, but it was vital. These hubs of preservation were often deliberately placed in caves or fortified temples, high in the mountains or deep in the deserts. This strategic isolation protected the precious manuscripts from the political upheavals and invasions that frequently consumed the great empires of the plains. It was on the peripheries, not in the centers of power, that knowledge found its safest refuge. The climate itself became an ally in this silent mission. The dry, stable air of Central Asia acted as a natural preservative, preventing the moisture and mold that would have turned these documents to dust in more humid regions. This perfect combination of human dedication and environmental luck led to one of the most spectacular discoveries in modern history. For centuries, a sealed cave in Dunhuang, China, guarded its secret. When it was finally opened at the turn of the 20th century, it revealed a hidden library containing tens of thousands of manuscripts. They had been walled up for nearly 1,000 years. This was not a collection of a single culture, but a true international archive. There were texts in Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese, and even Old Uyghur, covering everything from Buddhist sutras to star charts and medical treatises. Scholars like Susan Whitfield have shown that these oasis towns were not just stops on a trade route. They were vibrant international knowledge exchanges. A merchant from Persia might share an astronomical idea with a monk from China, who would then translate and copy it, creating a new thread in the web of understanding. The journey of these preserved texts, however, was far from over. From the deserts of Central Asia, they began a new voyage, carried by both fate and commerce to an even more unexpected sanctuary, a place of ice and isolation where they could sleep for centuries more. High in the rugged mountains of Greece, the monastic community of Mount Athos has stood for over 1,000 years, a world deliberately set apart. Its inaccessibility was not a barrier but a feature, designed to protect a life of contemplation from the distractions and dangers of the world below. Within the silent Scriptoria of these monasteries, a sacred duty unfolded, one that went far beyond copying prayers. Scribes, in their devotion to preserving divine words, also became the unexpected guardians of secular wisdom. They meticulously transcribed the works of Aristotle and Hippocrates, of geometers and astronomers, right alongside their religious texts. The very isolation that shielded them from crusades and conquests also insulated this accumulated knowledge from the shifting intellectual currents of medieval Europe. A similar story played out in the lofty highlands of Ethiopia, where remote monasteries safeguarded unique treasures like the Kebra Nagast, a text weaving together history, legend, and astronomy in a narrative completely unknown to the outside world. In these treasury libraries, the dry, cool mountain air worked in concert with human ingenuity to preserve the fragile pages. The scribes were master conservators, developing sophisticated techniques to ensure survival. They prepared parchment with such skill that it could resist insects for centuries, and they brewed iron gall inks of remarkable durability, formulas that modern scientists still strive to fully replicate. This was a continuous, quiet labor, a cycle of preservation that saw knowledge not as a commodity to be traded, but as a sacred trust to be passed down. For generations, the full scope of what these mountain sanctuaries held remained their secret, a vast reservoir of ancient thought waiting just beyond the horizon of mainstream scholarship. The question is almost irresistible. If such places could hide the works of Greek philosophers for a millennium, what other intellectual treasures might still be sitting on a dusty shelf in a forgotten corner of a remote monastery, completely unknown to us? This very possibility sets the stage for the most thrilling part of the story, the moment of rediscovery, when a single individual stumbles upon a secret that changes everything. A prayer book copied in the 12th century seemed utterly ordinary. For centuries it passed through various libraries, its true nature completely unseen. It was a palimpsest, a word derived from the Greek for scraped again. In an age when parchment was more valuable than gold, medieval scribes would often take an older, seemingly less important manuscript, carefully scrape or wash away the original ink, and then reuse the pages to create a new book. On the surface, this particular volume was a beautiful Byzantine prayer text, but hidden just beneath its holy words lay the ghostly, erased traces of something astonishing, the unique surviving copies of several treatises by the legendary Greek mathematician Archimedes. This was the Archimedes Palimpsest. For the better part of a millennium, his revolutionary ideas remained trapped beneath the surface, a secret conversation with the future. The original Archimedes text had been copied in the 10th century, only to be scraped off and overwritten 200 years later. The prayer book was its disguise. The moment of revelation came in the early 20th century, but the true resurrection would take nearly 100 years more. Scholars realized that with the naked eye, they could just barely make out faint geometrical diagrams lurking behind the prayers. The most important of the recovered works was called the Method of Mechanical Theorems. This text had been considered utterly lost, known only by its title from references in other ancient books. It was within the method that Archimedes revealed his thought process, his intellectual machinery for discovering mathematical truths. He used concepts of infinity and infinitesimals, a way of thinking that would not be formally developed into calculus until the work of Newton and Leibniz in the 17th century. He was essentially performing calculus almost 2,000 years before it became a cornerstone of modern science. Unlocking this treasure required a technological miracle. A team at the Walters Art Museum embarked on a multi-year project, employing advanced imaging techniques that were like giving scholars a new form of sight. They used multispectral analysis, a process that involved photographing each page under different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared. The various inks, both the original and the overwritten, reacted differently to each wavelength. Sophisticated computer algorithms then processed these hundreds of images, digitally peeling away the top layer of text to reveal the faint, erased writing beneath. It was a painstaking, pixel-by-pixel archaeological dig on the surface of parchment. This digital recovery is a modern parable, a story of how we can now resurrect knowledge that was not just lost but deliberately erased and hidden in plain sight. The Archimedes Palimpsest fundamentally rewrote the history of mathematics, proving that ancient Greek thought was far more sophisticated, more intuitively advanced than anyone had dared to believe. It stands as a stunning reminder that the key to the past is not always finding a new library, but learning how to read one we already had. And this prayer book was just the beginning of such discoveries hiding in plain sight. While the Archimedes Palimpsest was a single book hiding a monumental secret, another discovery revealed the entire life of a civilization, preserved not by design but by sacred custom. In the attic of the ancient Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo, a small, sealed room known as a Genizah had been quietly filling with paper for nearly 1,000 years. According to Jewish tradition, any document containing the name of God cannot be casually destroyed. Instead of being thrown away, these sacred texts were reverently stored in this Genizah, a final resting place for worn-out writings. Over the centuries, this practice expanded to include not just religious scrolls, but every piece of paper that might possibly bear the divine name. This meant that alongside pages of scripture, the community deposited personal letters, marriage contracts, shopping lists, legal deeds, and business receipts. The room became a time capsule, a chaotic, sprawling archive of an entire people's daily existence, sealed by dust and tradition. The world remained completely unaware of this treasure until the 1890s, when two Scottish sisters and scholars of Semitic languages, Agnes Lewis and Margaret Gibson, brought fragments from the Genizah to the attention of a young Cambridge lecturer named Solomon Schechter. He immediately recognized the staggering significance of what they had found. Schechter traveled to Cairo and secured permission to bring the entire contents of the Genizah back to Cambridge University. The scale of the find was almost beyond comprehension. More than 400,000 individual manuscript fragments were extracted from that attic, a tidal wave of paper that had been frozen in time. For historians, it was like discovering a complete, unedited social media feed from the medieval world, a raw and unfiltered look into the minds and markets of 1,000 years of history. Within this mountain of paper, scholars found astonishing intellectual cross-pollination. Nestled between a merchant's angry complaint letter and a recipe for ink were previously unknown drafts of philosophical works by the great Moses Maimonides, written in his own hand. There were fragments of Greek scientific and medical texts, not in their original language but carefully translated into Arabic and Hebrew, showing a vibrant, ongoing dialogue between Jewish, Islamic, and Christian thinkers. This was not the isolated knowledge of a single community, but proof of a deeply interconnected Mediterranean world where ideas flowed as freely as trade goods. The Genizah's contents forced a complete rewrite of social and economic history, revealing a medieval society that was highly mobile, fiercely litigious, and remarkably literate. Ordinary women engaged in complex legal battles, merchants operated sophisticated international trade networks, and everyday people corresponded across vast distances. The Cairo Genizah proved that sometimes the most complete picture of the past is not preserved in royal chronicles or great libraries, but in the accumulated paperwork of daily life, saved by a rule against throwing things away. It stands as a monumental testament to the power of accidental preservation, a theme that continues with a discovery that would not be found in an attic, but in the frozen ground of a Viking grave. The same volcanic fury that entombed Herculaneum under superheated gas and ash performed a strange, paradoxical act of preservation. In a luxurious seafront villa believed to belong to Lucius Calpurnius Piso, the father-in-law of Julius Caesar, an entire library was instantly carbonized. The eruption of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79 did not burn these papyrus scrolls to ashes. It baked them into solid, blackened lumps like fragile charcoal briquettes. For centuries after the villa was rediscovered in the 1700s, these artifacts were considered little more than curiosities. They were the ultimate locked library, their contents seemingly lost forever the moment they were saved. Any attempt to unroll them would cause them to crumble into dust, a final, cruel joke from history. The villa's library was a specialized one, heavily focused on the philosophy of Epicurus. This was not a random collection, it was the personal, curated book collection of a Roman aristocrat, frozen at a single moment in time. Epicurean philosophy, which championed the pursuit of happiness through knowledge and friendship, was immensely influential in the ancient world, but most of its original texts were thought to have been wiped out by time and rival schools of thought. Here in this villa were hundreds of them, all waiting. The key to unlocking them would not come from a scholar's tweezers, but from a particle accelerator. The real breakthrough began with high-resolution X-ray computed tomography, the same type of CT scanning used in hospitals, but reading the scrolls required something even more powerful. Researchers realized that the ancient carbon-based ink made from lampblack and gum contained virtually no metal. This meant it was nearly invisible in a standard CT scan, as it had almost the exact same density as the carbonized papyrus itself. The solution was breathtakingly clever. They used a special type of X-ray phase contrast tomography, a technology that could detect the tiny, microscopic bumps on the papyrus surface where the ink had been applied 2,000 years ago. The scribe's pen had slightly raised the fibers of the papyrus, and that physical texture, that topography, remained. Then, artificial intelligence entered the scene. Teams like the UK-based Herculaneum Society and the International Vesuvius Challenge began training sophisticated machine learning algorithms to recognize these subtle, three-dimensional patterns. The computer learned to distinguish the ghostly imprint of a Greek letter from the random cracks and textures of the volcanic rock. It is a process of virtual unwrapping, digitally reconstructing the scroll as it was before the eruption, layer by fragile layer, without ever touching the original artifact. This work has just begun to pay dividends, with the first complete words and passages from within the scrolls being successfully read. We are now peering into the mind of a first-century Roman, seeing which philosophical arguments he valued enough to own, and recovering texts that the world has not read since the days of the Roman Empire. This library is a time capsule in the most literal sense, a direct line to a specific individual's thoughts and intellectual world. The meticulous, pixel-by-pixel work on the Herculaneum papyri proves that no case is truly hopeless, that even knowledge turned to stone can find its voice again. It asks us a profound question: what other forgotten libraries are waiting not in attics or caves, but in the very ruins we have already excavated, their secrets hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the right key to be invented? The Mongol Empire forged the largest contiguous land empire in human history, and its greatest treasure was not just gold, but information. At its administrative centers, from the steppes of Karakoram to the splendor of Kublai Khan's court in China, imperial libraries grew into vast repositories of conquered knowledge. These were not quiet halls for contemplation, but dynamic archives of statecraft, filled with Chinese medical encyclopedias, Persian astronomical tables, and manuals on engineering, agriculture, and taxation from every corner of the known world. The Mongols were pragmatic rulers, and they understood that to govern such a diverse empire, they needed to absorb and utilize the expertise of their subjects. This systematic accumulation created a single, unprecedented reservoir of global knowledge, yet this very concentration made the knowledge vulnerable. The sack of Baghdad in 1258 was a catastrophe of fire and blood, an event that symbolized the violent end of the Abbasid Caliphate and its great house of wisdom. Countless manuscripts were lost in that conflagration, a devastating blow to human civilization. But the story does not end there. The chaos of the Mongol conquests, while destroying central repositories, also triggered a massive and unintended diaspora. Scholars, scribes, and artisans, now displaced, fled for their lives, carrying with them the very knowledge their conquerors had gathered. They traveled west into the budding cities of Europe and south into the courts of India, their precious scrolls and books tucked away in their belongings. This forced migration became one of history's great and tragic ironies. The empire that shattered libraries also scattered their seeds. Advanced Chinese star charts, which detailed celestial movements with stunning accuracy, began to appear in European observatories generations later, their origins obscured by time. Formulas for gunpowder, meticulously recorded in Chinese alchemical texts, resurfaced in European manuscripts describing new and terrifying weapons of war. The Mongol policy of relocating skilled individuals had forcibly transferred entire technologies across continents, planting them in new soil where they would lie dormant before suddenly germinating. This complex process challenges the simple idea of loss. It suggests something more profound, a transformation and migration of ideas on a continental scale. The fragmentation of the Mongol libraries did not erase knowledge. It turned it into a planetary puzzle, a collection of disconnected pieces that historians are still patiently reassembling today. This great scattering set the stage for the next act in our story, where a new repository would rise from the ashes, designed not for conquest but for consolidation. While the Mongol conquest scattered knowledge across continents, one Italian town was building a fortress to keep it safe. The Library of the Malatestiana in Cesena is not just a collection of books, it is an architectural statement carved in stone and wood. Completed in 1454, it stands as the first civic library in Europe, a place conceived not for monks but for the public. Its very design was a radical departure from the secluded Scriptoria of monasteries. Here, the pursuit of knowledge was declared a civic duty, a treasure for the entire community. The magnificent vaulted hall, with its 3 aisles of gleaming white columns, feels more like a sacred space for human reason than a simple storage room. And along the rows of dark wooden benches, you find the books, each one secured by a slender, elegant chain. These chains were not a sign of distrust, but a profound innovation in accessibility. They ensured that every precious volume, from a rare manuscript of Cicero to a groundbreaking medical text, remained in the library for all to consult. Anyone with the requisite learning could walk in, lift a chained book from its desk, and study it right there. This was the birth of the public library system, a revolutionary idea that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. The collection itself is a perfect time capsule of Renaissance humanism, the intellectual movement that sought to revive classical learning. It holds meticulously copied works of Latin poets, Greek philosophy translated into Latin, and scientific texts that were fueling a new age of discovery. Because the library has survived virtually untouched by war, fire, or modernization, walking into the Malatestiana is like stepping directly into the mind of a 15th-century scholar. You see the exact books they saw in the very room where they read them. This incredible preservation is no accident. It is the result of an unbroken chain of civic pride and institutional support that has lasted for over 550 years. The people of Cesena, through countless political upheavals, recognized that their library was their identity. They protected it not as a relic, but as a living heart of their community. The Malatestiana stands as a powerful counterpoint to the great lost libraries, a triumphant example of what humanity can achieve when it makes a conscious, continuous commitment to preserve its own wisdom. It proves that loss is not inevitable, yet for every story of deliberate safeguarding, there is another of astonishing, unplanned survival, where knowledge endures through sheer, blind luck. Far from the stone halls of European libraries, another treasure was being guarded under the desert sun. In the ancient city of Timbuktu, the true wealth was not gold but paper. For generations, families known as the guardians of the manuscripts have protected a staggering legacy, hundreds of thousands of handwritten texts from the medieval period. When modern conflict and extremism threatened to destroy this heritage, these families undertook a rescue operation of breathtaking courage and ingenuity. They hid the precious bundles in desert caves, sealed them in metal trunks and buried them in the sand, and built false walls and secret compartments within their own homes. This was not a matter of simple storage, it was an act of defiance, a clandestine network of preservation operating in plain sight. The contents of these rescued manuscripts are forcing a seismic shift in our understanding of history. Written primarily in Arabic and various African languages, they reveal Timbuktu and the wider Mali Empire as a flourishing center of intellectual life. These are not just religious texts, they are detailed treatises on law, astronomy, mathematics, and sophisticated medical manuals. One manuscript details a complex herbal remedy for meningitis, a treatment grounded in deep observational knowledge. Another contains precise astronomical charts used for navigation and timekeeping, demonstrating a scientific tradition that was advanced for its era. For centuries, this entire corpus of African scholarship was isolated, its brilliance unseen by the outside world, creating a massive gap in the global narrative of science and learning. The heroic rescue of these texts from modern threats is a direct echo of the ancient perils they survived, proving that the fight against intellectual loss is a continuous, living struggle. Today, through international efforts like the Timbuktu Manuscripts project, these fragile pages are being digitally photographed and catalogued, one by one. This painstaking digitization is a new form of preservation, creating a backup copy that no fire or conflict can destroy. Each scanned page is a rediscovery, a voice from the past challenging long-held Eurocentric assumptions and restoring a missing chapter to the story of human knowledge. It makes you wonder what other centers of ancient wisdom are still waiting in the shadows, their stories not yet told because their guardians are still keeping their secrets safe. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 sent a tremor through the world of knowledge, but from the rubble of that final collapse, a wave of Byzantine scholars fled westward, their most precious cargo packed in trunks and saddlebags. They carried with them original Greek manuscripts that had been preserved for a millennium in the libraries of the East, texts that were either entirely unknown or only poorly understood in Western Europe. Men like the esteemed teacher Manuel Chrysoloras arrived in Italian city-states like Florence and Venice, and they brought not just the raw words of Plato, Aristotle, and Homer, but the living tradition of how to read them. For the first time in centuries, Western scholars could engage with the full depth of classical philosophy, untangled from layers of mistranslation. This was not a quiet academic exchange, it was an intellectual detonation. The arrival of these texts provided the direct fuel for the fire of the Italian Renaissance. Suddenly, artists and architects could study the precise geometric principles of Euclid. Astronomers could read the original star catalogues of Ptolemy. Thinkers could grapple with Aristotle's theories on physics and politics directly from the source without a filter. The knowledge contained in these refugee manuscripts became the raw material for geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci, who fused artistic beauty with scientific observation, and later for Galileo, whose challenges to ancient models of the universe were themselves a form of deep engagement with the very texts the Byzantines had saved. This transfer of knowledge was far from simple. It involved painstaking translation from Greek into Latin, fierce debates in the courtyards of Florentine palaces, and the eventual fusion of Greek thought with a burgeoning Latin humanist culture. The tragic exodus from a dying empire inadvertently gifted Western Europe with the foundational texts for its own rebirth. It stands as one of history's great ironies, a political and military disaster that became an incalculable gain for science and philosophy, proving that the migration of ideas often follows the most unexpected and desperate paths. The Byzantine Empire guarded its ultimate naval weapon with a secrecy so profound that its formula vanished from history. This was Greek fire, a terrifying liquid flame that could not be extinguished by water and clung to enemy ships, turning the sea itself into a weapon. Its deployment from bronze siphons aboard Byzantine dromons was a spectacle of psychological warfare, a near-magical defense that saved Constantinople from multiple sieges. The secret of its composition was so vital to state security that it was known only to a handful of individuals, perhaps even a single family, and its loss was the direct result of this extreme secrecy. When that chain of knowledge was broken, the technology evaporated. For centuries, chemists and historians have played a forensic game, attempting to reconstruct the recipe from fragmented descriptions. Was it a volatile petroleum distillate like naphtha, enhanced with resins to make it sticky? Did it contain quicklime, which ignites on contact with water, explaining its fearsome reputation? We may never know for certain. The puzzle of Greek fire is a stark lesson in the fragility of practical knowledge. It proves that a technology, no matter how powerful, is not truly preserved if it exists only in the hands of a few. It requires a living tradition, a community of practice to survive. This pattern of loss repeats itself in other ancient marvels. The Romans, for instance, developed a concrete that has endured 2,000 years in seawater, while our own modern ports and breakwaters crumble after a few decades. Their secret appears to have been a specific volcanic ash, which created a unique chemical reaction that actually strengthens the material over time. Similarly, the legendary swords of Damascus, famed for their sharp, resilient blades with a distinctive watery pattern, were forged from a special type of high-quality steel imported from India. The exact process of repeated heating, folding, and cooling, which incorporated carbon nanotubes into the metal, was lost when the supply of that raw material was disrupted. In each case, a collapse in the supporting infrastructure, the trade routes, or the guilds of master craftsmen led to the irreversible loss of a superior technique. These are not stories of forgotten theories, but of forgotten practices. They remind us that technological progress is not a simple, constant upward climb. It is a path that can have missing stretches where advanced solutions are abandoned and must be painstakingly rediscovered. The quest to understand Greek fire and Roman concrete is not mere historical curiosity. It drives cutting-edge material science today as researchers analyze ancient samples with electron microscopes, hoping to reverse engineer sustainable and durable building materials for our own future. The past, in its silent, stubborn way, is still teaching us how to build a better world if we can only learn to listen. A physician in 11th century Europe had few resources beyond folk remedies and inherited superstition. But at that very moment, in the vibrant multicultural city of Toledo, Spain, a monumental intellectual project was underway. After Christian rulers reconquered the city, they made a startling discovery. The great libraries there were filled not with heretical texts, but with an immense treasury of advanced knowledge written in Arabic. Scholars like Gerard of Cremona were recruited to translate these works into Latin, and what they found would reshape the future of medicine. The most pivotal of these texts was the Canon of Medicine by Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. This was not a simple collection of remedies. It was a monumental 5-volume encyclopedia that systematically synthesized the entire medical knowledge of the Greeks, Persians, and Indians, and then expanded it with centuries of original Islamic scholarship. For a Europe that had lost much of the legacy of Galen and Hippocrates, the arrival of the canon was like discovering a complete and detailed map of the human body after centuries of wandering in the dark. It introduced a rigorous system of diagnosis, a logical method for identifying disease based on pulses, urine, and symptoms. It laid out a sophisticated understanding of pharmacology, detailing the properties of hundreds of drugs and how they interacted. Perhaps most importantly, it presented a revolutionary concept, the idea of contagious disease, explaining that certain illnesses were spread by tiny, unseen seeds. This was a framework built on observation and logical deduction, a stark contrast to the prevailing ideas of divine punishment or miasmatic vapors. The canon quickly became the standard medical textbook at universities from Montpellier to Vienna, and it would hold that authoritative position for an astonishing 600 years. Its influence was so profound that it provided the very foundation for modern clinical practice, introducing early principles of clinical trials by stressing the importance of testing treatments on a small scale before widespread application, and insisting that medical conclusions must be based on empirical evidence, not just tradition. Yet this long reign also reveals a subtle danger in the rediscovery of lost knowledge. The canon was so comprehensive, so brilliant for its age, that it eventually became a new orthodoxy. Later generations of European physicians began to treat it not as a starting point for new inquiry, but as an almost infallible scripture. The very text that had once liberated European medicine from ignorance now, centuries later, risked stifling the very innovation it had originally sparked. The journey of Arabic medical texts is a powerful reminder that scientific progress is never a simple, linear march. It is a global relay race where the torch of understanding is passed across cultures and centuries, sometimes burning brightly, sometimes hidden from view, but never truly extinguished. Deep within a medieval prayer book, erased and written over, a ghost of ancient science waited to be seen. For centuries, scholars knew of Hipparchus only through the words of others, a legendary Greek astronomer from the 2nd century before the Common Era, credited as the founder of trigonometry and the first to try and map the heavens with mathematical precision. His own star catalogue, the very foundation of Western astronomy, was considered completely lost, a phantom known only because the later astronomer Ptolemy referenced it in his own work. The historical record suggested Ptolemy had built upon the Greek master's foundation, but without the original text, no one could be sure. This all changed with a prayer book in the Library of the St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt. It was another palimpsest, its parchment pages originally used for a far more technical purpose. In 2022, a team of researchers applied multispectral imaging to the manuscript, and beneath the later religious text, they found a stunning revelation. Faintly etched coordinates for the constellation Corona Borealis, the northern crown, emerged from the background. The numerical data was not just random jottings, it was a perfect match for the precise position of those stars as they would have appeared in the time of Hipparchus. The accuracy was breathtaking, proving this was a direct copy of his long-vanished catalogue. This single recovered page did more than just confirm the existence of a lost text. it fundamentally rewrote the early history of astronomy. The coordinates were far more accurate than those in Ptolemy's later, more famous catalogue. This suggests that Hipparchus's original work was superior, and that over the centuries, errors had crept in as the data was copied and recopied, a slow degradation of precision. The discovery paints a picture of a much more advanced and mathematical Greek science than historians had previously allowed. Hipparchus was not just making rough sketches of the sky, he was performing complex calculations to fix each star's position with remarkable exactitude. His data was so good, so useful, that it was still being carefully transcribed centuries after his death, even as the original manuscript crumbled into dust. This one page is a powerful testament to a vast body of precise observational data that once existed in antiquity, a library of numbers and charts that was subsequently misplaced. It forces us to ask a haunting question. How much other advanced technical knowledge from the ancient world has simply been erased, overwritten, or broken into fragments we have not yet learned how to read? The hunt for more fragments of Hipparchus's catalogue is now a vibrant, active pursuit, a reminder that our picture of the past is not a finished portrait, but a mosaic where new tiles are still being found, each one capable of changing the entire image. The silence left by the Cathars is a profound one, carved by fire and faith. In the sun-baked region of Languedoc, a unique Christian community flourished, known for their stark belief in a world divided between spirit and matter. These were the Cathars, and their radical dualism posed a direct threat to the authority of the medieval Catholic Church. Their spiritual life was deeply textual, centered on a sacred book called the Gospel of the Secret Supper, a text that presented a version of Christianity the Church deemed dangerously heretical. When Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade in the 13th century, the goal was not merely military conquest, but the complete annihilation of a belief system. This made the Cathar's manuscripts a primary target. Crusaders and inquisitors were under explicit orders to seek out and destroy every Cathar text they could find. The burnings were systematic and terrifyingly effective, a deliberate campaign of intellectual erasure aimed at silencing a rival interpretation of God. Yet legends persist of secret libraries, hidden away in the labyrinthine fortresses of Montségur, or smuggled to safety by sympathetic nobles just before the final siege. The question haunts historians and treasure hunters alike. Could any of these libraries have survived? A sealed cache of forbidden knowledge waiting in a forgotten cave or a sealed chamber within a castle wall? No definitive trove has ever been found, which only deepens the mystery. This absence is itself a powerful historical document, a testament to the success of one of history's most effective acts of censorship. The search for the lost Cathar libraries has become intertwined with even grander myths, like the quest for the Holy Grail, suggesting that what was hidden was not just books, but an entire alternative history of Christianity. Their story forces us to confront a difficult truth. Some knowledge is not lost to accident or neglect, but is deliberately silenced, its guardians eliminated, and its very memory suppressed. The Cathar case is a chilling example of how the victors of an ideological war can shape the narrative for centuries, leaving us to wonder what other voices have been completely erased from our collective past, their secrets lost not to time but to fire. A sealed jar buried in the Egyptian desert held a silence that would last 1,600 years. In 1945, an Egyptian farmer named Mohammed Ali al-Salman was digging for fertilizer near the town of Nag Hammadi when his hoe struck something hard. It was not a rock but a large, sealed ceramic jar. Hoping for gold, he smashed it open, only to find 13 ancient leather-bound books inside. Disappointed, He reportedly brought them home, and some of the fragile papyrus pages were even used to kindle the family oven. This mundane act nearly incinerated one of the most significant theological discoveries of the modern era. What he had found were 13 papyrus codices, a collection of over 50 texts that comprised an entire library of early Christian thought. These were not the familiar Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They contained works with names like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Secret Book of John. They were Gnostic texts, and they presented a version of Jesus and his teachings that was radically different from the one that had become orthodox. In these texts, salvation came not through faith alone or church doctrine, but through a secret, intuitive knowledge, a gnosis in Greek, a direct personal revelation of the divine spark within each person. This was a Christianity that emphasized inner enlightenment over outer ritual, a path to God that was deeply personal and mystical. The reason these codices were so carefully sealed in a jar and hidden in a cliff face around the 4th century becomes painfully clear. This was a library on the run, as one version of Christianity consolidated its power and defined its official canon of Scripture. Other interpretations were declared heretical. Their texts were sought out and systematically burned. The monks at the nearby monastery of St. Pachomius likely buried this library to save it from destruction, a final, desperate act of preservation that succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. For over a millennium, the winners wrote the history of early Christianity. The Nag Hammadi discovery gave a voice to the losers. The Gospel of Thomas, for instance, contains no narrative of Jesus' life, death, or resurrection. Instead, it is simply a list of sayings, one of which begins, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke." This portrait of a Jesus who reveals hidden wisdom challenged the very foundations of the biblical narrative that had been standardized centuries before. The rediscovery of this library forced a complete re-evaluation of Christianity's first centuries. Scholars had to confront a messy, vibrant, and fiercely competitive world of competing beliefs, where the line between orthodoxy and heresy was still being drawn. The formation of the New Testament was not a smooth, preordained process, but a long and contentious struggle where some texts were elevated to canonical status and others were condemned to oblivion. The Nag Hammadi Library is the ultimate proof that loss is not an accident of history, but often a deliberate act of power. It is a collection that preserves a shadow history, a road not taken, reminding us that the past we inherit is only one version of events, and that other truths can sleep in the earth for centuries, waiting for a chance to speak again. While continental Europe was reeling from the collapse of Roman order, a remarkable intellectual refuge was flourishing on its westernmost edge. In early medieval Ireland, an island that had never been part of the Roman Empire, a network of remote monasteries became the unlikely guardians of a vanishing world. Sheltered by distance from the continent's relentless turmoil, these communities turned their Scriptoria into powerhouses of preservation. In places like Clonmacnoise, perched on the banks of the River Shannon, and Bobbio, founded in the Italian Apennines by the Irish monk St. Columbanus, the quiet scratch of a quill was a defiant act against the encroaching dark. The monks dedicated their lives to copying texts, but their mission extended far beyond the scriptures. With meticulous care, they reproduced the works of Virgil and Cicero, manuals on Latin grammar, and even fragments of Greek philosophy, ensuring these pillars of classical thought would endure. Their labor was not one of mere duplication, but of artistic devotion. They developed a unique and breathtaking script known as insular manuscript, a style characterized by intricate, swirling, interlaced patterns and vibrant colors that seemed to weave text and image into a single luminous tapestry. Masterpieces like the Book of Kells are the ultimate expression of this tradition. where every page is a testament to the belief that knowledge itself was a sacred, beautiful thing worthy of this extravagant effort. This was preservation as an act of faith, but these scribes were not destined to remain in isolation. A powerful spiritual ideal called peregrinatio, a voluntary exile for Christ, compelled them to become wanderers. They embarked on perilous journeys across the sea, carrying their most precious possessions in leather satchels. These were not just pilgrim monks, they were mobile libraries, their book satchels containing the very seeds of classical learning. When they founded new monasteries in places like St. Gall in Switzerland, they established libraries that would become major European centers of scholarship, stocked with the texts they had so painstakingly preserved. The works of Cicero that fueled the Renaissance, the poetry of Virgil that inspired generations, all survived the so-called Dark Ages because of the quiet, diligent work of scribes in stone towers buffeted by Atlantic storms. The Irish example stands as a powerful lesson that in times of fracture, the margins often become the safest keepers of the center's greatest treasures. This pattern of peripheral preservation would be tested again, but in a very different way when a library of immense importance was lost precisely because of its central role in the heart of an empire. For over 1,000 years, the Imperial Library of Constantinople stood as the primary guardian of the classical world. Founded in the 4th century, it was the direct heir to the knowledge of Greece and Rome, a fortress of the mind built to last for eternity. This was not a quiet sanctuary, but a living institution at the heart of a tumultuous empire, weathering fires, sieges, and internal religious wars. Its long, slow decline was a story of attrition, not a single cataclysm. Waves of purges targeted so-called pagan texts, removing philosophical works deemed threatening to Christian orthodoxy. Neglect during periods of political instability saw its collections dwindle. Yet the most devastating single blow came not from a traditional enemy but from fellow Christians. In the year 1204, an army of crusaders, diverted from their mission to the Holy Land, brutally sacked the city. They did not just loot gold, they targeted the very soul of Byzantine civilization. Countless manuscripts were torn apart for their precious bindings, burned for fuel, or sold off in bulk to anyone who would pay. The loss was incalculable, a cultural catastrophe that shattered a millennium of continuous preservation. But the library's story is not one of total defeat. In a profound act of foresight, its scribes had undertaken a technological revolution centuries earlier. They had systematically transferred the fading contents of fragile papyrus scrolls onto a new, more robust format, the parchment codex. These were the first real books, with bound pages that were far more durable, easier to reference, and much more compact to store. This single innovation was a quiet victory for preservation, ensuring that the texts that survived the physical destruction of their containers would endure for centuries more. The library and its successor institutions became a roller coaster of destruction and stubborn renewal, mirroring the dramatic fortunes of the Byzantine Empire itself. When the final Ottoman onslaught came in 1453, the library was a shadow of its former self. Yet in a final, tragic irony, this ultimate disaster had been preceded by a slow, steady diaspora. For generations, scholars sensing the empire's impending collapse had been smuggling out its most precious codices, carrying them to safety in Italy. The very act of the library's physical dissolution is what scattered its seeds so widely. The legacy of the Imperial Library is therefore a paradox of immense loss and miraculous partial salvation. It managed to preserve the core of classical Greek literature, not within its own walls, but by sending it out into the world, a final gift from a dying empire to a future it would never see. A translation is far more than a simple dictionary exercise. It is a bridge built across time and culture, and in the medieval world, these bridges became the only lifelines for entire libraries of thought. The most crucial of these were two systematic, state-sponsored movements, separated by centuries but united in purpose. The first began in 9th century Baghdad, where the Abbasid caliphs funded a monumental project to seek out and translate the entire body of Greek scientific and philosophical knowledge into Arabic. This was not a haphazard effort. It was a coordinated intellectual industry led by scholars like Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Nestorian Christian who headed the translation bureau at the House of Wisdom. Hunayn did not just passively copy texts. He and his team actively hunted down the oldest and most accurate Greek manuscripts they could find, often traveling great distances to compare different versions of the same work. They then translated them with a scholar's eye, correcting scribble errors they discovered, adding their own insightful commentaries, and even expanding on the original ideas based on centuries of subsequent research. Through this meticulous process, the works of Galen on medicine, Ptolemy on astronomy, and Aristotle on logic were not merely preserved in a new language. They were refined, debated, and elevated, becoming the new standard texts for the entire Islamic world. This creative act of interpretation ensured that Greek knowledge did not just survive, it evolved, becoming richer and more robust. Centuries later and a continent away, the flow of this preserved knowledge reversed direction. In the Spanish city of Toledo, after its reconquest by Christian kings, scholars discovered the immense Arabic language libraries left behind. They realized these books held the very Greek wisdom that Europe had lost, now enriched with 8 centuries of Islamic commentary and innovation. So began the second great translation movement. In Toledo, a unique collaborative ecosystem emerged. A Christian bishop like Raymond of Sauvetat would sponsor a team where a Jewish scholar, fluent in Arabic and Hebrew, would translate the text aloud into the common Romance vernacular, and then a Christian cleric skilled in Latin would write down the final official version. This three-way partnership between Muslim, Jewish, and Christian intellectuals was the engine that transferred this vast body of knowledge into Latin, the language of the newly emerging European universities. The Aristotle that students at Oxford and Paris would eventually debate was an Aristotle who had traveled a breathtaking journey. His logic had been translated from Greek to Syriac to Arabic, studied and commented upon by philosophers in Baghdad and Cordoba, and then translated from Arabic into Latin by a team in Toledo. Without this two-stage global relay, the core texts that fueled the European Renaissance in medicine, astronomy, and philosophy would have vanished forever. These translation movements teach us a vital lesson. Preservation is not just about locking a book away in a vault. It is the active, ongoing work of making knowledge speak to a new generation, ensuring that the conversation across the centuries never truly ends. The brittle pages of a manuscript no longer need to be touched to be read. We are now living through a second great translation movement, not between languages, but from the physical to the digital realm. This new universal library is not built of stone and chain, but of pixels and code, capable of reassembling the scattered fragments of lost collections from across the globe. Consider the Sinai Palimpsest project, which is using multispectral imaging to peer beneath the surface of manuscripts at St. Catherine's Monastery, revealing erased texts in a dozen forgotten languages without ever opening a binding. Or the ongoing work to digitize the rescued Timbuktu manuscripts, where high-resolution photography captures every fiber and flaw, creating a backup that can survive any future conflict. These digital surrogates do more than just preserve the current state of a fragile page. They can reveal secrets that are completely invisible to the naked eye. A layer of paint on an icon might conceal an ancient prayer, and a faint, faded ink can be amplified to crisp, readable text. This technological leap is transforming collaboration, too. A scholar in Tokyo can now examine a virtual manuscript from a library in Oxford at the same moment as a researcher in Cairo, their cursors moving together over the same digital page, discussing a marginal note in real time. The physical and political barriers that once kept collections isolated are dissolving, but the most profound change comes from artificial intelligence. Machine learning algorithms are now being trained to recognize obscure scripts, to suggest likely completions for torn or damaged sections of text, and even to identify previously unknown connections between manuscripts that are housed on different continents. An AI might cross-reference a unique turn of phrase in a letter from the Cairo Genizah with a philosophical fragment from a monastery in Greece, spotting a shared author or a common source that no human scholar working alone could ever have linked. This represents a true paradigm shift. For centuries, the story has been one of discovery, of finding a single lost library. Now the goal is integration, to weave every surviving fragment into a single, searchable tapestry of human thought. The digital age offers the ultimate promise to make the lost permanently found and the inaccessible available to anyone with an internet connection. This is more than just preservation. It is a global immune system for knowledge, our best hope for ensuring that the great silences of the past never fall again. A recovered manuscript is not always a simple gift. The very act of bringing lost knowledge back into the light forces us to confront difficult questions that have no easy answers. Who does this rediscovered past truly belong to? The modern nation where it was physically found, the academic institution that preserved it, or the global community that constitutes its audience? Consider the Rosetta Stone, a vital key to deciphering ancient Egypt. It was removed by British forces in the early 19th century and has resided in the British Museum for over 200 years. While its placement there undoubtedly saved it and made it accessible to millions, Egypt has repeatedly requested its return, arguing it is a symbol of national heritage taken under colonial power. This is not an isolated case. The famous Benin bronzes, intricate sculptures and plaques looted by British troops from the Kingdom of Benin in 1897 are scattered across museums in Europe and America. Their recovery and restitution have become a central issue in the modern museum world, forcing a painful re-examination of how many of our greatest cultural treasures were acquired. The dilemma is profound. In many instances, colonial-era explorers did physically save manuscripts from decay, neglect, or local conflict. A text in a European library vault might have been pulped for fuel or lost to moisture had it remained in situ. Yet this rescue came at a cost, severing the object from its cultural context and creating a legacy of dispute that echoes for generations. The ethical landscape is just as complex with new discoveries. When a team finds a cache of ancient texts today, the process is no longer a simple extraction. It involves delicate negotiations between international universities, national governments, and the local communities who have lived on that land for centuries. These communities may have their own oral histories and spiritual traditions connected to the site, claims that exist outside of formal legal frameworks. Their voices are now rightfully part of the conversation, demanding a seat at the table to decide the fate of their own heritage. Beyond physical ownership, there is the more subtle question of intellectual context. Should every piece of ancient knowledge be revived and put to use? An 800-year-old medical manuscript might detail a potent herbal remedy, but without understanding the precise rituals, dosage beliefs, and spiritual warnings that accompanied its use in its original culture, applying it today could be irresponsible or even dangerous. The same applies to ancient chemical formulas or engineering techniques, where reviving them without a full comprehension of their associated cultural safeguards could lead to unintended consequences. We are learning that knowledge is not just information, it is a package that includes its own ethical instructions. Even the wonderful tool of digitization creates new ethical forks in the road. While putting a manuscript online can democratize access for a global audience, it also raises urgent questions. Who controls the digital file? Can a corporation profit from selling access to scans of a text that is the sacred patrimony of a specific culture? If a manuscript is digitally reassembled from fragments held in 10 different countries, who then holds the rights to the completed virtual whole? The recovery of lost knowledge is never a neutral, purely celebratory act. It is deeply embedded in the power dynamics, economic interests, and cultural sensitivities of our present moment. To navigate this tangled web requires more than just scholarly expertise. It demands profound sensitivity, a commitment to collaboration, and a genuine respect for every stakeholder involved. Unearthing a lost library is only the first step. The far greater challenge is stewarding its legacy with wisdom and justice for the future. This deep-seated fascination with lost libraries taps into something primal within us, a narrative thread that runs from the sunken spires of Atlantis straight into our modern cinemas. We are captivated not just by what was lost, but by the tantalizing void itself, the empty space on the shelf that promises a secret. This is the allure of the treasure map with a missing corner, the encrypted diary promising a revelation. It is a story we are hardwired to love because it mirrors our own deepest anxieties and hopes. Underneath the adventure lies a quiet fear of cultural amnesia, the dread that we as a civilization might one day forget our own story, that the foundational truths we build upon could simply crumble into dust. This fear is coupled with a powerful longing, an almost mythical belief in a golden age of pure knowledge, a time before error and corruption where understanding was complete and absolute. We feel we have fallen from this intellectual grace, and the lost library represents a chance to return, to find that one pristine source that will make everything clear again. This psychological dynamic is what gives the search its irresistible energy. A lost text is not merely information, it is a key that could unlock a different version of our world. Historians of science see this pattern repeat itself time and again. The rediscovery of an ancient manuscript often acts like a catalyst, not necessarily because its ideas were wholly unknown, but because it arrives at the precise moment to shatter a rigid, accepted dogma. It offers a new, or rather a very old, perspective that the current intellectual establishment is unprepared for, forcing a revolution from the past. This is why the very knowledge that great works have vanished is so humbling. It is a stark reminder that our own civilization, for all its digital archives and cloud storage, is not a permanent fixture. Our most cherished data could become as inaccessible as a scraped palimpsest, our own wisdom destined for a future attic or buried cache. This recognition of our own fragility fuels the quest. We search for the lost libraries of the past not only to complete the historical record, but as a way of building a raft against our own potential future oblivion. The drive to find what is missing is, in the end, a profound act of hope for generations we will never meet. Our most exciting discoveries may still be waiting in the wings. The search for lost libraries is accelerating, fueled by technologies that grant us a kind of X-ray vision for the past. We now stand on the brink of reading entire collections without ever breaking a seal. The hundreds of unopened Herculaneum Scrolls are a perfect example, a library of Epicurean philosophy turned to carbon by volcanic heat. researchers have only just begun to decode their contents using particle accelerators and artificial intelligence, peeling back virtual layers to reveal words unseen for 2 millennia. The complete plays of Aeschylus or the missing books of Livy's history could be hiding within those very lumps of charcoal, their secrets preserved by the same disaster that entombed them. This technological leap extends far beyond reading what we can already see. Sophisticated ground-penetrating radar and satellite-based sensors are now capable of mapping subterranean anomalies, revealing the outlines of hidden chambers and forgotten tombs without a single shovel breaking the earth. A sealed repository from the pre-Columbian Americas, perhaps a royal archive of the Maya, could be detected deep within a jungle pyramid, safeguarding a completely unknown literary tradition. The deep seabed offers another frontier. Ancient shipwrecks resting in cold, oxygen-poor water create a perfect time capsule. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek analog computer, was found in just such a wreck. It is entirely plausible that a trading vessel carrying a wealthy scholar's entire library in sealed, wax-coated containers lies intact on the ocean floor, its scrolls preserved in the anoxic mud. Yet the next great discovery might not require a grand expedition at all. It could be lurking in the storage basements of the world's great museums, where thousands of unidentified papyrus fragments lie mislabeled or simply waiting for a scholar's attention. A scrap of poetry in a dusty box could be the key to reassembling a lost epic. The personal libraries of legendary figures like Aristotle or the philosopher Hypatia, which vanished amid political violence, remain the ultimate prize for historians. Their collections would offer an unedited window into the intellectual life of the ancient world. The future of this quest is not merely about unearthing new physical objects. It is about developing new ways of seeing. Advanced spectral imaging might one day allow us to read the ghost impressions of writing on the inside of decomposed book bindings or on pottery shards used as scrap paper. We are learning to ask better questions of the artifacts we already possess. The true potential lies in the synergy between human curiosity and machine intelligence, where an algorithm could cross-reference every known text and fragment to pinpoint a previously invisible connection. The next chapter of this story is being written now in laboratories and digital archives, reminding us that the greatest lost library might be the one we are only just learning how to read. Our journey from Ireland's Scriptoria to today's digital labs reveals a profound truth about human knowledge, a paradox of immense fragility and stubborn resilience. It survives not through a single grand plan, but through a chaotic mix of sheer accident, unwavering devotion, and flashes of brilliant ingenuity. The story of these lost libraries teaches us that progress is not a straight, upward line. It is a spiral where we often circle back to ancient insights, finally equipped with the tools and perspectives to understand them fully. The ghost of Archimedes, sleeping beneath a prayer book, waited nearly 2,000 years for a multispectral camera to awaken his calculus. The charred scrolls of Herculaneum needed a particle accelerator to give them voice again. This is not a linear march forward, but a constant, dynamic conversation with the past. Recovering these texts is far more than an academic exercise. It is the active reclaiming of our shared intellectual heritage, a process that continues to shape our medicine, our science, and our very understanding of the universe. The formulas that built our world and the philosophies that guide our thoughts often have roots in a forgotten library, a rescued manuscript, a text that refused to die. So let this story be a call to action for our own time. It urges us to value and actively protect the knowledge we are creating right now, from our digital archives to our physical books. We must be the devoted scribes and courageous guardians for our own era, ensuring that our collective wisdom does not become the next great mystery for a future generation to painfully and patiently solve. The conversation across the centuries is not over. It is waiting for your voice to join it. I would love to hear which of these lost libraries captures your imagination most. Was it the mathematical ghost in the palimpsest, the social world of the Cairo Genizah, or the frozen library of the Herculaneum Scrolls? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this exploration of history's greatest intellectual treasure hunts, please subscribe for more journeys into the past. The ghost of Euclid's geometry, preserved on Arabic parchment, is the same mathematics that allows an engineer to calculate the load on a suspension bridge today. These rediscovered texts are not museum pieces, they are active blueprints for our modern world. The rigorous logic of Aristotle, saved from oblivion by scholars in Baghdad and Toledo, became the very skeleton of the scientific method, the systematic process of questioning and evidence that defines modern research. Even the ancient speculations of Epicurean atomism, the idea that everything is made of tiny, indivisible particles, found a startling echo millennia later in the birth of quantum physics. This is not a coincidence, it is the legacy of a conversation that was almost silenced, now resumed. The influence flows just as powerfully into the realms of art and literature. When Renaissance artists rediscovered the architectural principles of Vitruvius, they did not just copy them, they used them to achieve the impossible. Filippo Brunelleschi's magnificent dome for the Florence Cathedral stands as a direct application of rediscovered Roman engineering, a feat that defined an era. Shakespeare's plays are steeped in the themes and characters of Plutarch's Lives, a classical text that returned to Europe in the baggage of fleeing Byzantine scholars. Our entire cultural landscape is built upon this resurrected foundation, but the impact is even more immediate. The urgent need to read a carbonized scroll from Herculaneum is what pushes physicists to refine high-energy X-ray tomography. The desire to reassemble 1,000 scattered fragments from the Cairo Genizah drives computer scientists to develop more sophisticated pattern recognition algorithms. The quest to preserve the Timbuktu Manuscripts accelerates advancements in non-invasive digital archiving. The story of lost libraries is not just about the past, it is a powerful engine for our future, forcing us to invent new ways of seeing and understanding. This hidden thread connects the quiet scratch of a monk's quill in a stone tower to the silent hum of a server farm, a continuous, collaborative project of the human mind. Our technological present is built on an ancient intellectual heritage, and every new discovery reminds us that the most important chapters of our story may still be waiting to be